after 50 no's, literally 50 no's, he was like, this looks cool. And so I think we were at 3 or 4 million users when we sold to Intuit. I found myself as an officer of a publicly traded company when I was 28 years old. I had $100 million in P&L to my name, which was...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another fabulous episode of the Healthcare Trailblazers podcast. I am quite intrigued to be sitting here today with the wonderful Aaron Patzer. Aaron is possibly, I don't know, most notably, but definitely one of a big part of your previous journeys. Founder of Mint. I am personally a Mint user and fan, and I'm sure many of you are as well because they have about 25 million users. Sold to Intuit a little bit thereafter, and then Aaron has gone on to found multiple different companies that we'll talk about. Also, I see over here you're an investor in Carbon Health. We had one of their co-founders on, Greg Burrell, great guy. And now Aaron is working on a really interesting software in healthcare. Not your first foray into healthcare, so. Very excited to hear all about you and your brain because you clearly think in a very interesting way. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, all right, tell us about you because you are serial entrepreneur doing a lot of things, and each thing seems to have been somewhere from relatively successful to enormously successful. So, where'd you start? And let's try to figure out how your brain works.
Sure. I consider myself maybe an engineer first and foremost.
Okay.
That is my training. I always love to build and to innovate. I always wanted to be an engineer, an inventor, and an entrepreneur. I'm fortunate enough to have about 10 or so patents, mostly in algorithms. I've got degrees in electrical engineering, computer science from Duke, and I was doing a PhD at Princeton, which I ultimately dropped out of, but that was electrical engineering, lasers, and optics, as well as algorithms for internet routing and that sort of thing. So that was what I'm trained in. Fascinating.
And so you got a bunch of degrees, you dropped out, which I think is part of a badge of honor for people like you. It's like part of the success journey, right? So what happens after? What do you get started with?
So actually the first, I had a couple companies in high school and college because I just needed to pay my way through expensive schools. And I don't come from a particularly wealthy family or anything. Mm-hmm. So I paid my way as a programmer and as starting companies. And that worked out well. I tried to start my first, I guess, really tech-oriented, tech-heavy company called Genomic Acceleration, doing a special purpose processor to accelerate bioinformatics algorithms that I patented myself when I was 20. I had to train myself sort of as a lawyer to do that. And it turns out you should just use a bunch of like GPUs and special purpose, general purpose processors instead of special purpose. So I learned a lot about the economics in that failure. Joined a startup to see how it was done, and that was a lot of fun. And then I was like, okay, this isn't that hard. I mean, like there were a couple of mysteries that were unraveled about fundraising and incorporation and whatnot. And so at 25, I decided I should start Mint and pretty much use all my life savings and watch that drain to pay employees out of my pocket before we got funding. And then Josh Koppelman, first round capital, came along, and after 50 no's, literally 50 no's, he was like, this looks cool. And so I showed him a demo because I had a server running on my laptop in the car. This was the days before iPhones and before you could sort of demo something, on your phone and ubiquitous mobile broadband. He liked it, took another year and a half to build it, and we won the very first TechCrunch event, which is pretty crazy. I was on the stage with that big oversized check. If you've ever seen Silicon Valley, it was literally that. In fact, the people who were on that TV show, I know them. They were one of the founders of First Round Capital, Mike Arrington, who founded TechCrunch. Like, these are people that I hung out with, which was quite surreal. And then, the great financial crisis happened, and it was honestly the best thing that could have ever happened to a personal finance company. All my friends, the companies were sort of failing, and I was like, we quadrupled, last 6 months. And so I think we were at 3 or 4 million users when we sold to Intuit. Um, I found myself as an officer of a publicly traded company when I was 28 years old. I had $100 million in P&L to my name, which was crazy. Honestly, it was too much. I felt like a kid. I get called into the principal's office all the time by the CEO for, I don't know, making forward-looking statements, doing something, just being a 28-year-old in a company that was professionally run by 40 and 50 something people. But it was a great experience. And eventually they liked what I was doing enough that I became head of product innovation across all of Intuit. So if you've used TurboTax or especially QuickBooks Online, that product was actually kind of failing to a competitor called Xero. It was still a desktop-based product, and I helped take it online and design what it would be today. Probably made more money for Intuit off of those designs than off of Mint. So, maybe a couple 100 million people have used the products that I've had a chance to design. I really care a lot about beauty in software. I think it's really underrated.
About what?
Beauty.
Beauty.
Beauty. Like, I care about the names of buttons. I care about designs. I care about pixels. I care that the software that you use is something that is fun to use, that's pleasant to look at. And left Intuit 2013-ish, and then started this company called Fountain. And Fountain, the premise of it was on-demand video expertise. And I just wanted to be able to access
What year is this, sorry?
2013.
Okay.
So this is 10 years ago. And I, don't tell them this, I basically scraped all of LinkedIn and figured out how human skills were interconnected. I was like, oh, so software engineers who mention JavaScript have a 50% probability of knowing React or something like that. And so you would type a question and we would use AI to categorize it. We'd say, oh, this is a medical question. This is a veterinary question. This is a home improvement question. And then it would ring, basically ping 10 people. And the first to pick it up would talk to you on FaceTime or Zoom. And it'd be $5 or $10 or $15, depending upon the category. And you'd speak to a doctor or a nurse or even a plumber. I used it a couple of times to fix my water heater. Instead of $100 call out, it was $5, and you get some guy who's like, oh, okay, that's a ream. Reach behind here, flip this switch, and it was amazing. But it was also a failure in some sense. We sold it and we paid the investors back and all of that. I thought that it was going to be like a Google for expertise. And what it ended up being is the vertical players won in this category. So doctor on demand. Well, from the name what you're getting out of that service. There were on-demand lawyers. And we were just well, it's the same infrastructure for everything. Veterinary questions, we had a ton of them. But the people who won were the people who had, I don't know, the biggest network of veterinarians, or who just had that in their brand name. And it would almost be like if Google, wasn't Google, but was just Stack Overflow for code and a different search engine for other topics. So yeah, that was kind of a lesson learned, and it was also probably too soon. Nobody was Zooming, nobody worked, or very few people worked remotely. It was at least 5 years too soon. Sold that and moved to New Zealand. Walked the length of
America?
From the Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Walked the length of the country. So I spent 4 months in a tent and in huts, just sort of back to nature. First sort of not a digital detox. That wasn't really why I did it. It was just because since age 16, I'd basically been working every day of my life to achieve my life's goals. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, I guess I have, which is really weird. It'll leave you a little lost in life.
Yeah.
Because I'd made a lot of money from Mint, and I'd sold these other companies, and I was an angel investor. And then you're like, well, who am I? What do I do next? I also had my first taste of failure, and what I consider to be failure, because it wasn't a billion-dollar company. Because it was okay since we did sell it for millions, but it wasn't as big as the last one.
Yeah.
So that'll tell you, that'll ego check you, if you will. Then you have to decide, what's your purpose in life. And so I was out in the forest, and eventually I realized that my life purpose is to take boring industries that are full of complexity and, frankly, anxiety, and bring a kind of calm, clarity, and simplicity to them. And so Mint was, God, the average person has 10 different financial accounts, and nobody really understands finance and mortgages and interest rates and what you should pay off first and what you should invest in, and like making it simple. And it was only 5 pages. If you look at Quicken or some products that came before, it was like there were like 50 different functions, and so simplifying and making it beautiful are two of my themes. Was a important aspect. And so healthcare is like that. It is way too complicated, lots of conflicts, lots of complexity. Even the people sort of inside healthcare, I don't think really understand healthcare. They might understand the medical side, but they don't understand the business side, or vice versa, and all the conflicts that happen. And so it's kind of like a life's mission to untangle this web of complexity, and make a tool that just gets back to the basics, like, will definitively make you healthier in the long run, by using data, by using AI. And so started Vital with my brother-in-law, Dr. Justin Schrager. Much of my family's in medicine. My sister's an epidemiologist. And the goal is, it's an AI powered patient experience tool. So this will guide you through your hospital experience if you're in hospital for days or weeks, through an emergency room experience. Soon we'll do surgeries and ambulatory surgery centers. Eventually we'll do more on what do you do when you're outside of the hospital to get back to health. How do you use data, and the collective knowledge of what's worked for everyone else to guide people, because there's so much empirical data out there that is absolutely unused. And most of healthcare happens at home, not at the hospital. And people are clueless. Like, we're still at the stage of, let's Google for how to solve this. And you see a bunch of trash articles. It's not data driven. Half of it is just, frankly, SEO content for people who just want your attention and your ad dollars, who are not trying to help you at all.
Yep.
And so we're out to change all that. So it's vital.io. We're in over 100 hospitals. We serve over 1 million patients a year, and hopefully that's 2 or 3 million by next year. And so we work with a ton of hospital systems. We can predict whether you're going to have septic shock. We can predict what your wait times are going to be in a hospital. We can predict whether you're going to bounce back to the hospital because you're not following your medications or whatever it might be. We use large language models to translate doctor's notes into something that you can actually understand as a human, that don't have all the medical jargon and all of the abbreviations. It's like a medical GPT that we've been working on for quite a long time, and it's a game changer. Nobody is using this. Sometimes I feel like the things that we did in Silicon Valley, medicine and healthcare, tend to be 10 or 20 years behind. I can run sort of the same or a similar playbook, and it's just decades ahead of everyone else.
Yeah. Okay, I have so many follow-up questions. My head is going to burst.
I know it was a long monologue. Thank you.
No,
for
there's
anyone
so much
who's
there.
Still listening.
We could spend 2 weeks. Okay, I want to go all the way back. You are in college. You worked your way through college. Okay, and you said that what stood out to me is that you said that you started a couple companies to put yourself through college. Why didn't you get a job like anybody else? What was in your brain that was like, no, I'm not just going to get a job. I'm going to start a couple companies.
Well, I'm from Evansville, Indiana. It's a relatively small place on the Ohio River, right where Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky meet. I went to a high school that frankly trains people to be factory workers at the local, Toyota or plastics sort of factory, and I was just really bored in public high school, and so I would just spend my time just thinking up businesses. The only real job opportunities, because it wasn't a big city, there wasn't really interest, were, I don't know, fast food or manual labor. And I mean, I did plenty of that, like shoveling driveways for snow, mowing lawns, chainsawing things, all of that. But I had the good fortune of we spent a ton of money on a computer when I was like 6, 7 years old, and so this was like the
Yeah.
80s. Like I had my first computer was 12 megahertz and had a 10 megabyte hard drive, right? And it would store like one high definition photo today. Um, and so I was always out of space. And so I was always like writing little scripts to compress things and move files around and load things and swap things. And I knew a lot about it. I had a modem pre-internet. So I was on these things called bulletin board systems. And I actually hosted one when I was 10 years old. Like I've had email since
Wow.
1988. I had email back when email was not instant, but when you would send an email, you would upload it to the server, and it would go to like a central, it would bounce from server to server, but they would do it in batch. So every 4 hours, the load of emails would get delivered to the next server, and then to the next server and the next server. Like literally, it was like the electronic mail system. You take for granted that this stuff happens
Like at
instantly.
that point, it's
It
probably just
didn't.
like you and like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs sending emails to each other. You ever see that comedy
There's a
sketch
lot of
of like
interesting people.
with the
Yeah.
phone?
So that's sort of what got me started. And I was on the internet back when I remember when the World Wide Web came out. And I'm not that old. It just happens to be that I got
Really young.
started when I'm really young. So I'm
Wow.
42 now. I was young enough that I was too young to hit the first .com phase, and I worked as an intern, but I couldn't really capitalize on it, except building websites. So I registered getawebsite.com.
Really?
I eventually sold that. It was a
Website.com?
decent domain, right?
Get a website. Okay.
Getawebsite.com. Yeah,
Cool. What'd you sell it for?
and I sold it for like five
Nice.
thousand bucks. I mean, it's not that
Yeah,
great a
but hey.
domain. I wasn't smart enough to register, the two-letter
Right.
domains in 1994 or anything. Um, but yeah, I could make the equivalent of $50 or $100 an hour programming, which to me was insane, coming from a small town, and I dramatically undercharged in retrospect for building websites. Back then, I'd build websites for, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000. It was huge money as a kid. And then the other quotes when I'd ask people when it was done, I was like, what did other people? They were like, it was going to be $10,000 through like an agency that wasn't run by a
Right.
teenager.
Right.
Thank you. So that got me started. I loved it.
So it was kind of just
Uh,
like in your DNA from day one. What did your father do?
he worked at Bristol Myers Squibb, so this big pharma company. But the one thing that he did when I was a kid is he would read to me like Wall Street
Huh.
Journal, and he taught me about compound interest when I was like 12.
Interesting.
And so I developed a little spreadsheet that was like, okay, well, if I put in X amount per day, I was like, have $25 billion by the time I retired. And then he was like, you forgot about taxes. And I was like, what are those? And it dramatically decreases, what your rate is going to be, inflation and all the rest. But it was good. I was using spreadsheets to do sort of basic financial calculations. Um, and then I was also using, tools like Quicken and Microsoft Money to manage my own business, to figure out what my expenses were and whatnot, what my profits were. And so I hated them, which is in part why I started
Yeah, and you
Mint.
start
It was
seeing the
just
storyline a
born
little
out
bit.
of
Yeah.
my own
Hmm.
frustration, right? So yeah, that's how I got started. It was just out of my own interest. I've always just wanted to build stuff that I want. Like my true north, even in Vital, you get so much input from doctors and nurses is like, is this the tool that I want? If I'm in the hospital, is this what I want to give to my mom or my sister or my dad? Um, and so sometimes I'm just like, my team will be like, well, what's the business justification for this? What's the ROI? And can we sell this? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just cool. It's like, I just want this.
It's like,
And it usually turns out well because like, it's just a very, I don't know, human way to think about product prioritization. You don't want to wing it on everything. You do need to listen to your customers and all of that, but like sometimes you just got to build what you want.
okay, so let's talk about that for a second, even though I still have a bunch of other follow-up questions. But this is interesting because like even in my personal life, I've gone through this like from like early childhood till now. I've gone through this kind of like journey where as a child you think that you're unique in a negative way, meaning that your experiences are your own, right?
Hmm.
And so but then I got a little older and I started realizing that no, chances are a lot of people see the world in a very similar way, right? And see things in
Mm.
a very similar way. And chances are the way that you see that thing, the other person sees as well. And the way you see it, other people see you. And so that kind of plays into like self judgment and self consciousness because you start realizing that the same way you don't think about that other person 24/7, and judging their every move, chances are nobody's doing that to you. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Um, and I know I've
Yeah.
digressed a little bit, but then I've kind of come back to thinking, no, but I am kind of unique. But then you kind of come back to kind of a middle ground where you realize that you are unique to a certain extent, and you kind of find that balance. So my question to you, in regards to that specific point, you're creating products that hundreds of millions of people eventually, right now millions of people use. how do you
Hmm.
how do you decide what might be just your unique bias, um, versus trusting that your gut might reflect the general human experience?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from this, and you can easily fall in love with your own ideas. So, I pretty much spend every weekend, every evening, when I'm everything from when I'm dancing to when I'm like out on a run, I'm thinking about product. And sometimes I do come up with ideas where I'm like, this is amazing. We should do this. We should do it immediately. I usually let it sit, and I let it sit to see if it comes back to me over and over and over again. And the ones that come back to me over and over again, there's something there. And you also should talk to your team, talk to other people, and they'll give you, some reflection on this. And if you get a consistent, why are you doing this? Doesn't make any sense. You should probably pay some attention to that. So I tell my product managers that you should listen to everyone. You should ignore 70% of what you hear, but you should take 30% of it on board. And I think that's about the right
Hmm.
ratio. Somewhere 80-20 or 70-30. But you should ignore the majority of what you hear, otherwise you'll be pulled in too many directions by customers or whatnot. Um, and you really want to solve the customer's underlying problems, not necessarily the way that they think they should be solved.
So those are three fantastic lessons right there. I really like that.
Yeah.
First of all, the things, sitting on it and waiting for things to come back to you, I think is extraordinarily intelligent. Um, that makes a lot of sense because that kind of is a really easy way to siphon out the hype from something that might be.
Totally. And you should use it for everything. Like, one of the hard parts when you begin a company, it's silly, but it's sort of like come up with a name. And Mint it's a freaking great name.
So good.
Like, um, Mint is a place where money is made.
Yeah, it
Mint
makes you
is
think
a
of money.
quality. It's fresh. It's interesting. It's also green, like the color of US dollars. So it fit in so many different ways. And I think vital is strong, memorable, 5 letters, vital signs in health, vital as in it's vitally important. It takes a long time to come up with a good name,
Yeah.
and you'll come up with like a bunch that you love and you write them down. And then, like, 2 hours later, or even a day later, without thinking or without looking at that list, try to remember the names, and you'll remember like 3 on your list of 15, and the others are crap and you should immediately discard them, and it's only those 3 that you yourself remember.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that your memory is very fallible, and fades is an advantage.
Yeah. And then that last thing that you said, I just wanted to highlight again because I think it was very insightful. Try to think about when you hear feedback, again, forgetting the 70%, and also obviously taking into account, only listen. This is something that only listen to feedback from people that are actually your target audience, like your friends and your family and random people that you interact with, that are great at giving feedback. If they're not your target audience, it's not even worth the listen. But I mean, you can be polite, but there's no. But the latter point, which was when you hear feedback that is target audience feedback, try to understand what the underlying issue that is then being expressed through the top layer problem is, and try to solve that. It's very insightful. I like that. So you mentioned that after Fountain, you kind of had a bit of a self-reflection period, let's call it.
Mm-hmm.
So you lived in a tent for 4 months. Was that by yourself? Was that with some people?
So with my partner, Rebecca. So she was a Kiwi, and we had lived in the States for 5 years, and so we decided to move to New Zealand. And I thought, I'd never lived in another country. It'd be nice to get to know it, and so I like nature, and I'd been working, pretty much every day hard out since I was 16 years old,
Yeah.
building companies. I mean, to put this in perspective, like, I triple majored at Duke. I got a sort of a minor in finance. Um, I never got drunk in college once. Like, I went to 2 parties and that was about it.
Yeah.
I was the very first one in the engineering library and on Saturday and Sunday, and there was nobody else in there for 4 or 5 hours. And so it was, a life of dedication. It was a bit stoic, probably too much so. And so I thought I'd just do something for myself. And it was a good time of self-reflection. I think I turned 35 on that trip, which is, maybe when you mature and you lose your childish notions, right? Like, there are things that you want at age 15, 16, that if you hold on to too dearly, they will affect the rest of your life. You're like, okay, I'm gonna be a billionaire, and I'm gonna buy, Lamborghinis, and like, I'm gonna do this, and like, for me, it was like, I was like, I want to be Thomas Edison. I want to invent new industries, and like, I'm an okay inventor. I have patents, but I'm probably not going to have 1,000 patents like he did. Probably not necessarily going to invent new industries. And I was like, what am I really good at? And like, it's a bit of ego death in a way. And I was like, what can I be the best in the world at? And I was like, I can be the best at taking, like, a boring, anxiety prone industry and making it calm, clear, and simple. And I did it with finance, and I think I can do it with healthcare. And like, if I ever did another startup, it'd be in like some other boring industry, like education or government or like infrastructure, where there's not a lot of competition, because maybe there's not a lot of like top Silicon Valley types or whatnot going into it.
Yeah.
And it's just massively complicated, and maybe it's a little regulated, and you're like, how can I simplify this? It's just a mess. It is some house that you've inherited that just needs so much remodeling, and everything needs to be cleared out. And how can I turn this into a thing of beauty?
Yeah.
And I was like, that sounds kind of lame, actually. Like, I'm the guy who takes crappy industries and makes them slightly cooler. And you're like, okay, I'm that guy. And then you settle into it. And you're like, it's not what I thought I was going to be when I was 16, but it's actually really cool.
Yeah.
And it's really fun. And I actually enjoy it. And like actually enjoying it is way more important than you think. So, like, I'm CEO at Vital, I'm also head of product. That's not a combination you see very
Hmm.
often. And maybe it's not even advisable, but I love it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I do it.
The
You have to
Musk
do it for
vibes.
yourself.
Yeah. Well, I want to bounce a theory off you because I think it probably contributed as well. I have this theory that in business specifically, it is impossible for a person to think ahead of them beyond the amount of time that they have behind them,
Hmm.
because that's just the way that we as humans work with perspective. So I would imagine that yeah, turning 35, you've got. I mean, most people probably only have 7 years behind them, but you had at that point 15 to 20 years behind you. So you can also
I did.
think with over a much larger horizon in a really legitimate way, not in a fluff way. Just telling yourself, "Here's my 30-year plan." No, you're 20 years old. You don't have a 30-year plan. Okay, I hate to break it
It's
to you.
true. When I was a teenager, I used to try to come up with life plans that span decades, and it was a good exercise
Yeah,
to see what you wanted, but it was absolutely
you can't. It's
none of
not
it.
legitimate. Yeah,
You can't.
but here's my question, Jude. I hope I can articulate it properly because I think it's important. Sounds like you found your kind of north star on that trip. Um, you've articulated what that is as far as taking chaotic industries and boring industries and turning them into kind of calm, simple waters.
Hmm.
Um, it also seems like that started the next period of your life where you're more maybe like obviously not less ambitious because you're obviously still extraordinarily ambitious and you're starting a whole new thing and you're trying to actually act on that. But there was something that you said where kind of you were like, wait a second, I got started to kind of make it, right? You said you didn't come from wealth, and that usually you probably want
Hmm.
to make a ton of money, right? And you probably
Hmm.
and you did. And you turn
Hmm.
around, you look at your bank account, you're like, I could do anything I want. I could go anywhere I want. I can buy anything I want.
It's funny. Once that happened, I no longer wanted all the cars
Yeah, yeah,
and I bought two houses, and I was like, it's kind of a pain to have a second
yeah,
house from just a maintenance and like,
yeah,
paying two bills and whatnot. And
yeah,
like, it's funny once something is achievable that you actually don't want, you find out what you actually want. And money is like one out of 10 things that really matters in life. I must say, maybe it's cliche, but um, have a good partnership in life with somebody who is above all kind and that you can communicate openly with is maybe the biggest lesson of my later life.
mm-hmm.
Um, it will bring you so much peace and so much joy in life. And I found myself. It's one of those things that's maybe shameful to say, where you over optimize when you're younger, when you're in your 20s, or even me for my early 30s. Like, oh, you date people because they look good on paper, they're very attractive, and they went to Stanford or Harvard, or they're the VP of marketing at Yahoo, a couple of those venture capitalists, and like, no, can you have a real conversation with somebody about hard things? And are they genuinely a nice person? Nice is like the most underrated thing in relationships.
Yeah,
A nice, calm
easygoing.
relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it will dramatically improve your professional life
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
To have a home life that is in a good state.
Right, right. No, I couldn't agree with that more. Um, so and yeah, to your earlier point, I think that it's also part of the human condition. We are extraordinarily uninterested with our own reality. We're only interested in other realities, and that's how you see this phenomenon where like you'll see a celebrity on the red carpet and another celebrity come up to celebrity A and say hi, and celebrity A is fanning out on celebrity B, and you're like, you're what do you what?
Hmm.
But to them, they are completely uninteresting because they are them, right? And you obviously have that with success. Why you have people that just don't see themselves as successful because they've reached that success, and now it's not ahead of them, it's just present, and so it's uninteresting. It's like, okay, well, now I can do this, so then what's so my larger question to you is, do you wish that you would have had that trip specifically the understanding that you came to earlier? Or do you feel like you needed those 15 years to hustle, maybe driven by the wrong reasons long term, maybe, but you couldn't have had that, you couldn't have had where you are now in that middle space where you're able to come to that without that? I don't know if I'm
It's
articulating
hard to
myself.
say. Yeah, you probably can't come to that space without that. I mean, it's like Carl Jung, the great psychologist, says that life doesn't truly begin until you're 40. In some sense, like you're always looking forward and you're preparing and you're training for life and for business and for success so much in your 20s and 30s that like there's this golden period. Some people reach it sooner than others, but maybe it's 35 to 55 where like you're just in the prime of your life. You're just like, you've got the skills, you can do this. And recognizing when you're in the peak of your power, it gives you a lot of presence to be where you are. But it's also just a joy. Like, you know, I did bodybuilding for a while, and I always wanted to be, just the most fit person in the world. And like now, I'm like, I don't want to be any stronger. I don't want to be able to do any more pull-ups. I don't want to be able to run a marathon any faster. I just want to be maintain what I've got for another 20 years, and that would be success. And it doesn't sound ambitious, and like everyone's always growth, growth, growth. You've got to be better. You've got to be better in some areas. Yeah, in business I'd like to be better, and I'd like to deepen my personal relationships, but like some things you can just be satisfied with, and that's okay. You don't have to
Yeah.
be pushing forward in all aspects all the time.
Yeah.
Just pick one.
Yeah. So what are your aspirations for Vital? It sounds like you had basically a massive success out the door with Mint.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other ones, like you said, were by any standards extraordinarily successful, but I think by your standards were less so. Um,
Mm-hmm.
were you concerned that you kind of peaked with Mint? And then how did you regain that? Obviously, now you have the confidence that Vital is going to be maybe bigger and better. How did you regain that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, certainly after you've had success, you wonder if you've peaked in life. It's it's one of those things that you'll get absolutely no sympathy for, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so it's real tough to have been that successful. But if you ask people, that tiny percentage of people who have had that, professional athletes, once they retire, are often really lost. So how do you regain it? I guess you just gain that perspective that, the cliche journey aspect of it. Like I just really love what I get to do on a day-to-day basis, and the products that we build as a team, how many patients they help, how many family members they help. Just healthcare's healthcare's so messed up for a variety of reasons. I'll give you a couple. Every lab test that you get, whether you see it on the MyChart patient portal, when you get it from LabQuest or whatever, it is like a table of numbers that's like, hey, your bun is 41 micrograms per deciliter, and that's low or high. And you're like, what does that mean? And what's a microgram? And like, it is the least human way to communicate to us. And then, have you ever seen like we get all these reviews, whether it's Yelp or Google ratings or everything you ever buy on Amazon now, it's $10 plastic trinket. It's got 12,000 reviews. So what? It's a stupid $10 plastic trinket. Have you ever seen a proper review for like a heart stent or a shoulder replacement or anything that like actually matters and will impact your life for the rest of time? Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
This is like a $30,000 surgery. How painful was it? What did you do to recover most quickly? Because the doctor said do these four things. Maybe only two of them really mattered. How painful was it two weeks out? What do you wish other patients would have known? Patient reported outcomes and perspectives. There's none of it.
Hmm.
You know, you see medications, and it's almost cliche that like every drug you see advertised on TV. And by the way, the US is, I think, one of only two countries that allows pharma to advertise direct to consumers. So
Yeah.
think about that
Yeah.
very deeply. Every one of these is like side effects may include, and it's always nausea, fatigue, malaise, general depression,
Yeah.
etc. Well, they have to report anything that's more than the baseline. So it
Mm-hmm.
could be just 1 or 2% more. Is this drug going to cause, diarrhea 2% increase or 80%
Right.
increase? Because that really matters.
Right. Right.
Nothing.
Right.
There's
Right.
no way you can get any of that information. Doesn't that seem messed up? Given that there's hundreds of millions of medications out there, doesn't it seem like there's, now that I've mentioned this to you, isn't your mind blown that we're in 2023 and there are just these like wide open spaces that, in retrospect, you'll be like, how did we make it this far without any of that
Yeah.
data?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to solve all that.
That's awesome. Aaron, I hope we can do a part two, because this part one did not really do your journey thus far or Vital any justice. This is kind of just a very long intro, but really appreciate you spending time with us. Where can people find you?
You can find Vital at vital.io. And you can find me on LinkedIn. It should be LinkedIn /in/A Patzer, I think.
I actually have it. Yep. /in/A
Or
Patzer.
Twitter, it's A Patzer everywhere.
Well, yeah, fascinating. I wish you tremendous continued success on Vital, and it's great to see you today. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.